Welcome to the Leadership Excellence Podcast. I'm your co-host, George Trachilis, and with me, as always, is the insightful Dr. Tom Lawless.
Great to be here, George. Dr. Leiker's focus on culture and development are more relevant than ever.
For our listeners, we want you to go deeper and access all of Dr. Leiker's lessons. Go to ow64.com and download our app. Let's dive into this week's essential lesson on developing leadership skills. Welcome to the Leadership Excellence Podcast. I'm your co-host, George Trachilis, and with me, as always, is the insightful Dr. Tom Lawless.
Great to be here, George. Dr. Leiker's focus on culture and development are more relevant than ever.
For our listeners, we want you to go deeper and access all of Dr. Leiker's lessons. Go to ow64.com and download our app. Let's dive into this week's essential lesson on developing leadership skills.
Thank you. I've been hearing great things about the conference and the people coming here and the excitement, and so hopefully you'll be as nice to me as you were to the other speakers. Where's the present? Okay, so I'll be talking about this new book, The Toyoda Way to Lean Leadership. It's not kind of obvious the way I laid this out, but if you looked over time at the books I've come out with, they've increasingly moved from broad general principles to talking about people and leadership and culture and some of the softer aspects. I also had the opportunity to visit for those of you who are local, to take a little trip down the river, and it was really nice, hot, but really nice. And you can see the beauty, and then again, for those of you locally, not to be offensive, but I also got a picture of this sort of albatross of museum, your Human Rights Museum, which is a wonderful idea, and I'm sure it's going to be a fabulous museum some year. So one of the things that sort of struck me when I was looking at it is this a lean problem? And we talk about lean, and we think about taking waste out, and value stream mapping and 5S, and you've got this museum that's several years late and way over budget, and people were looking forward to it, and they'll have to look forward to it for a while. And could you go in as a lean person now and solve this problem? Come in with Post-it notes and paint and 5S, or do some value stream mapping. Obviously the answer is no. But again, the question is this a lean problem? And I think the answer is yes. Except you have to take a much broader view of lean. So, for example, did they do a good job of even conceiving of this museum? I'm talking about the lower left-hand corner that looks sort of like a big ship. Did they make a good decision on how big and grandiose this structure should be for a museum on human rights? Did they have a good plan for executing? Did they have a good relationship with vendors? Did they eliminate all the sources of uncertainty that they possibly could in the planning and design stage? And the answer is obviously no, that it probably is much too grandiose. It might not even be appropriate for a message about human rights. And I doubt that they planned a whole lot of anything really well. So the way I've come to learn about lean, or at least the Toyoda Way, is that really at the core is plan, do, check, act. And in any problem-solving process, you'll see that at least 60% of the steps, whether it's 3 out of 5 or 6 out of 8, are planning steps. And start with the question, what is the problem? And then you have to understand the current situation, and you have to understand your customer, and you have to think very broadly about alternatives before you narrow down to a particular alternative, and then maybe make a model in this case, or several models, and show them to lots of people and get lots of input. So when you make a decision, it's a decision that's right for the customer and also low risk. And then you have to go through the process of very detailed planning and then revise the plan as you're implementing. And that whole process of PDCA, if it were done well, would have led to a museum that would be on budget, on time, and people would be enjoying it right now. There's no question in my mind that that's true. And that would be a lean project. Now, maybe value stream mapping as a project planning method would have been useful, but there's many other project planning methods that also would be useful. So as I've come to learn about lean, I've realized that for many of us, and particularly a few years back, there's a growing sophistication. We kind of got trapped into a fairly narrow view of what we mean by this concept of lean. So the problem that I want to address, and you should always start with a problem. The problem is, and not everything here is a problem, but the background is that lean has become a global movement. And many of you have traveled abroad, some of you don't. I travel all the time, and I go to many different countries and many different industries, and I've worked in defense, and I've worked in government and healthcare, and it's out there, and it's spreading, and it survives kind of like a roach. You just can't get rid of it. It has successes, it has failures, and it'll go through downturns, but somehow lean has been going on since I started studying it back in the early 1980s, and it's survived. So we have something important out there as a movement. There's now become a somewhat standard tool set. There's many different places you can go to take lean courses. You can go to Lean Enterprise Institute website, and they have workbooks, and you can look at the topics, and there's kind of a standard vocabulary and a standard set of tools. And they include this list, and then they include methods of implementation like the Kaizen event. And when you do a reasonable job of applying any of these tools to a problem that fits, you get results. And I personally have never been in a situation where we might have trouble getting through layers of management to actually do something, but when we actually get to the shop floor, get to the Genban, we get a team of people together, and we pick a problem, we use some tools. I've yet to experience a situation where we didn't make significant progress, usually pretty dramatic progress, and people are thinking differently, and they're excited, and they're engaged, and that's actually not difficult to do with any reasonable level of facilitation skill. So it works, but it's rare that if you come back in a year, you'll see what you implemented in that workshop. It usually has slipped back, and people will give you all sorts of excuses and reasons why they're not keeping up the metric board, or why they're no longer changing over the equipment at 10 minutes. They've slipped back to 25 minutes, and there's lots of reasons. They're busy, but it's slipped back. And to give you one story, we did work for the Navy, and the admiral got an agreement from the heads of each of the shipyards. They're doing overhaul and repair, that they would let us do one demonstration Kaizen event in each shipyard. And we did it, and each one was successful. And in one of the shipyards that we ended up working a lot with, we worked on the ball valve area, which was more repetitive. There were a few hundred a year. And we completely turned the shop upside down in a week and had good flow and had less inventory. And everybody thought this was just great, and this is the way things should be. About 6 months later, a new person got appointed to be the head of lean. And he had worked in the shipyard his whole life, and at one point he had been the supervisor of the ball valve operation. And he contacted me and said, I heard that you were our consultant, our sensei, and I want to learn, and I've been reading books, and I went back to the ball valve area because that was our model area, and it looks the same as it looked 20 years ago when I was a supervisor there. So I'm trying to figure out what happened. And I said, what probably happened is what always happens, which is that all these great ideas really didn't get implemented. They appeared to be implemented because we physically moved things around, but we hadn't really changed the thinking of the people in the area. And you can't do that in a week. It's impossible. You can get them excited and engaged, and you have great report outs, and you wear T-shirts, and it's a lot of fun, but you don't change people's thinking in a week. So he said, well, I was thinking everything I read about says we should have a model area, and I was thinking maybe the ball valve should be the model area, and we should redo it, but this time make it stick. And I had a student at the time who needed to get his hands dirty with lean, so I sent him out, and he worked for 6 months, and at the end of 6 months, they were at the point where we were at, in theory, on Friday of that week. That is, they did everything, nothing new. Every single thing we came up with in the 1 week Kaizen event had been implemented in 6 months, but it was owned by the people in that area. And they eliminated overtime, and their productivity doubled, and they actually got cited as the model lean area for the whole Navy at that time. Had admirals coming and senators coming to see this little ball valve area. So the problem is that the way of thinking has some holes in it. And interestingly enough, if you go back to Toyota the model, they don't do anything that looks really a lot like what consultants do with lean transformations. So I'll give you an example of a lean transformation at Toyota, or led by someone at Toyota. And that led to my conclusion that the secret sauce, because people want a silver bullet or some sort of answer to the question of how do we do it, what's the secret, what's Toyota's secret, and the secret, if there is any, is developing leaders who engage and develop people in problem solving or in process improvement, or you can substitute organizational learning. There's a variety of words. And that's really why we wrote the book, The Toyoda Way to Lean Leadership. Gary Convis, my co-author, had been the first plant manager at NUMMI after working for 20 years at Ford. And then he became the first American president of the Georgetown, Kentucky plant. There'd always been Japanese, and it was kind of a glass ceiling for Americans, and he broke through the glass ceiling. Then he became a managing officer in Japan, and then eventually he retired, and he wanted to write a book. So Gary had lots of profound teaching moments when he was at NUMMI coming from Ford, thinking like a Ford manager, and he would get these abrupt messages that would just shake his way of thinking. It would shake his world, and he remembers these highlights. So for the book, I interviewed him for hundreds of hours and then extracted stories, and one of them was when he walked through the body shop. Again, he had come from Ford, and in the body shop you have a lot of welding robots, and things are usually laid out in such a way that there's space between the welders so that you can have inventory buffers, because if some piece of equipment breaks down or a robot breaks down, you don't want to stop production. So he walks through and there's no room for any inventory at all. And he goes to the president at the time and says, there's been a mistake. There's no room for inventory buffers. And we're just going to shut down the plant all the time. We can't make cars this way. And the lean implementation was this answer. There's no mistake. Please fix the problems. End of the lesson. He didn't talk about value stream mapping. He didn't talk about flow. He didn't teach him the problem-solving method. Now, Gary struggled for a while with people in the area, and they got the level up to some reasonable level. Maybe it was running at 50% uptime, and they got it up to about 75% uptime, which was better than the average for the American car companies, but still far from Japan, where they're up over 95%. And at that point, the question is, how do you get you've got the low-hanging fruit, how do you get all the little problems that are causing downtime? And for that, he had his next aha moment, which was meeting with, this had been going on for a couple of years, and there was a new president who comes in, and this guy had been in finance in Toyota. And he knows nothing about the details of a body shop and welding. And people were kind of wondering, why has this guy been sent here? Was it a mistake? So he calls Gary in, and he says, I noticed that the uptime of the body shop is far below the level in Japan, and I'm concerned about that. And I've also noticed that when I come into the office, I walk by the manufacturing engineering department, and the manufacturing engineers are very busy, working very hard at their desks. So what I would like to do is I would like to get the manufacturing engineers away from their desks and where the problems are. And to do that, Gary, could you please make a breakdown report? And you can make it on one side of one sheet of paper. And every time there's a breakdown of more than an hour, I would like you to ask one of the engineers to make this report. And we have some Japanese trainers in the area, and they'll show you how to make the report. They know how to do it. And then every Friday for 1 hour, I'd like to have a meeting, and I'd like the engineers to present to me the breakdown report for that week. So Gary thought that was a good idea, and the engineers did it, and the Japanese, made boxes on the paper and said, first, what's the problem? And it was an A3 report, but they didn't call it that. And then the young engineers, American engineers, would present to this finance guy, again, that knows very little about manufacturing, and he would have a red pen, and he would make a bunch of marks, question marks. He'd cross out things, he'd write in notes, and then he'd go through that with everybody present and ask the questions. And what Gary was just amazed by is this guy had just penetrated right to the root of all the weaknesses in the problem solving of these engineers without having the technical engineering background. And then they would go back and they would work on this A3 again, and they'd bring it back the next week, and he'd have less red, but there'd still be a lot of red. Now, the interesting part of the story to me was that Gary was at these meetings, and he was just floored. He was just amazed by how smart this guy was and how he was able to actually understand the thinking of the engineers based on this one-page report, and based on that was able to pick apart their thinking, find weaknesses, and then they were learning how to solve problems. But at some point, he asked Gary to stay behind after a few of these meetings, and he says, Gary, son, there's a lot of red on these reports. And Gary said, yeah, I know. You're doing a great job. And he says, Gary, son, I think maybe if you spend more time with the engineers before the meeting, there'll be less red on these reports. And then Gary has another one of these epiphanies. I'm actually responsible for this. And then he started spending time with these guys, and then there was less red on the reports. And what Gary figured out was that he was a student, not the engineers. What this president had noticed is that Gary wasn't doing his job very well. He wasn't leading correctly from a Toyota point of view. Why would he let these engineers who reported up to him sit in their office at computers when their problems are on the floor? Why wasn't he solving the problems in a rigorous way and finding the root causes on the floor? Because he wasn't trained, and he needed to be trained. But notice, no A3 class, no teaching the steps of problem solving. Just go and see, and there's a real problem. This was not a made-up problem. The welding department was shutting down the plant. So there's something on the line. Okay, so Where did this start? This somewhat unique way of thinking about a company, about a business, about how you improve processes, about the role of leaders, and it started with Sakichi Toyoda, who was the founder of Toyota Automatic Loom, and most of you know the story of the wood looms that Sakichi Toyoda created, and the motivation at the time. He was the son of a carpenter and a poor carpenter in an out-of-the-way rice farming village in Japan, not near any city centers or any centers of power. And he simply made the observation that women, including his mother, grandmother, were working their fingers to the bone, making cloth for the family and for sale after a full day of work. And his mission was to help them by reducing the amount of labor required to make this cloth. And this was one of the looms he invented. He could invent the loom partly because he understood wood. He was a carpenter. And he had this deep craft knowledge. And he also was imaginative. And he could think of clever solutions, but then he could, with his own hands, put them into practice. And the first loom he created and the first invention was very simple. Using gravity, he was watching these women, and they would have a shuttle of thread, which they would send with their hands back and forth. And then they'd have to push the thread and tighten it, and that was the action, back and forth, push the thread and tighten the cloth. And that action of pushing back and forth, he thought maybe that could be done by gravity. So he created a wood chute and a system with foot pedals, and with foot pedals you could make the shuttle slide down the chute back and forth and eliminate at least half the labor, and it turns out that women were 3 times as productive as a result. So this is a good Kaizen. Okay, but again, it came from a need, a real need. It came from somebody who had deeply invested in skills, in craft-based knowledge, and could actually do it with their hands and could imagine how you could make it because of his deep knowledge of woodworking. And then he improved upon it, and then he improved upon it, and then he improved upon it. And eventually he had a vision of making a fully functional automatic loom, which I think about 20 years later became the G-type loom, which at the time was the only fully automatic loom in the world, and it was the best loom. And sold that to the Platt brothers in England. That money then became the capital to start Toyota Motor Company. So that's how the story goes. What did he really start? He started this company that made looms, and he invented lots of things. Everything he invented was the solution to a specific problem. And it was all done by trial and error. So he gets from nothing to the best loom in the world that's fully automated. And how does he do that? It wasn't a dream where he somehow in his dream imagines the G-type loom. It was through solving hundreds of problems and working with a team of people doing it. So what he did besides made a loom is he put his imprint on what's now Toyota Motor Company. He's the core reason for the values of the company. And the values he also is known as the king of inventors in Japan. As he grew older, his vision expanded. So at some point, it's helping women in the community. Later in his life, it became helping Japan to industrialize, and some call him the father of industrialization in Japan. Later, it became contributing to the world to make life easier for customers in the world, but always a vision of somehow benefiting society. So the core values coming from Sakichi Toyoda that are still with the company today are contribute to society. That's the purpose of the company. The customer always comes first, and the company always comes second. Respect for people. Know your business. You can't be hands-off and simply like Gary was trying to do, delegate and watch from the sideline. Get your hands dirty, hard work, discipline, teamwork, and constant innovation toward a vision. He had the vision for the G-type loom. He didn't call it that, but he had a vision for a fully automated loom. He took decades to get there, but every improvement he made was solving one problem. And he didn't know how he was going to get beyond that one problem to this perfect loom, but he knew there would be a next problem and a next problem. And over time, if he kept on solving problems, he would get closer and closer to that vision. So, and his favorite book was a book by Sam Smile. It's called Self-Help, who his mission in life was to help juvenile delinquents who got in prison and help them recover and become productive citizens in England. And he writes this book about how he teaches these young men to become productive citizens and to make them self-reliant, realize the world doesn't owe them anything, that they have to do it themselves and they have to be responsible for their own actions. And that's the favorite book of Sakichi Toyoda. And you can sort of see how that would fit his view of the world and how that view of the world then gets translated into the culture of Toyota. In a seminal speech by his son Kichiro, who had been asked by his father to do something special for society, to contribute something, Sakichi Toyoda said, "I contributed the automatic loom, now it's your turn." And Kichiro Toyoda picks automobiles, which was very unlikely as a choice, given that they're nobody out in the middle of nowhere in Japan, and there's huge companies like Ford, and they can't possibly compete. And in a seminal speech, he says, "I plan to cut down on the slack time in our work processes. As a basic principle, I will uphold the just-in-time approach." Now, he could have said that today, right? And he'd have an army of consultants behind him, and he'd have my books, and he'd have the LEI books, and everybody would know exactly what he was talking about by just-in-time. But this is in about 1939. And lean hadn't been invented as a term, and the concept of just-in-time had not been invented. So he made it up. It was a vision. How he made it up, I have no idea. Well, actually, there's different stories, and one is that he actually worked for the Platt brothers for 1 year in England, and one of the things he marveled at is how on time the trains were, which apparently was not true in Japan at the time. And he noticed that if he was 1 second late, he might as well be 10 hours late. He was going to miss the train. But if he got there early, he was standing around wasting his time. So it became kind of a passion for him to get to that train spot exactly the right time, within seconds of the train coming and getting on the train. And apparently that had a lot to do with his conception of just-in-time. But there's lots of stories nobody really knows. What we do know is that he conceptualized a vision like Sakichi Toyoda's vision of an automatic loom and had no idea exactly what it was or how he was going to get there. And the person who made it happen, who made this vision a reality, was Teiichi Ono, a manufacturing genius. And he and his team accepted Kichiro Toyoda's challenge to achieve just-in-time. And also there's a goal, a challenge, which was to catch up to Ford's productivity in 3 years, when Ford was about 9 times as productive and making over 1 million vehicles a year, and Toyota's making a few thousand. And they're making a lot of variety, not just one Model T, or I guess it was Model A at the time. And the way he achieves the Toyota production system, which he doesn't know what it's called, and he doesn't know what he's trying to achieve, he's just trying to achieve a manufacturing system that, under the conditions that they faced in Japan at that time, without capital, without resources, they could somehow learn to compete with this global giant. That was the challenge. And the way he did it was through adaptive problem solving, like Sakichi Toyoda. He solves one problem at a time. And in his book, The Toyota Production System, they put in a timeline. And you can see where each aspect of the Toyota production system got introduced. And at each time, he had discovered this is really the problem we face right now. And then he would come up with a solution. And then over time, it and it became a system. So the important thing is that it started in the 50s and took decades to evolve. It evolved. It wasn't invented. And it was invented by repeatedly solving problems. And it's still adapting, and it's still evolving today. And nobody in Toyota has a black belt in TPS or has a certification in TPS. And nobody in Toyota will say that they're an expert at TPS. They all say, we're just learning. And this is now 60 years later. So I came up in the Toyoda Way with a model. This is a different version of it, but I came up with a model with 4 Ps, and it started with philosophy, which is the company purpose. This is a little different model, but it was the philosophy, and then processes and people and problem solving. And what this shows is that really everything has to be arrayed around one thing, which is the purpose, the vision. So Sakichi Toyoda had a clear vision, and Kiichiro Toyoda had a clear vision. And the vision was something that seemed impossible, and they had no idea how they're going to get there. They didn't have a roadmap. And it involved all these things. They had to have processes that were repeatable, that they could test and adjust and adapt. They had to have people who were smart and committed doing that. There are certain tools that evolved over time in the Toyota production system, and every tool was a solution to a problem. But unfortunately, too often, lean is reduced to a waste reduction toolkit. And we've learned, and this was actually quoted, a paraphrase of a quote from Teach Yono, all we're trying to do is shorten the time from when the customer places the order to when we build and ship the product. And his vision for Toyota was a build-to-order company. We have no waste. When a customer wants a car, we build a car based on that customer specifications. So this is accurate that this was the vision. So what we're trying to do is eliminate waste. When we were working for the Navy and then later the Air Force, they loved the phrase war on waste. Any guesses why they might like that? So the metaphor fit, but what is the image that you get when you have a war on waste? You're there with your machine gun or your sniper or your ballistic missile, and you've got a target. You hit the target, you wipe it out, and the target is gone. And you've succeeded in the mission. So it's a vision of eliminating things, eliminate wasted steps, eliminate wasted activities, and it is blown up and it's gone, and now you can move to the next target. Is that really what was that what Sakichi Toyoda was doing? Could Sakichi Toyoda have invented the best loom in the world by going through the shop and finding waste and eliminating it? So the real genius of TPS was not that you find ways to eliminate waste and make processes closer together and eliminate inventory. The real genius that Teiichi Yono discovered really very early in the process is that when you have disconnected processes, problems hide. And when you connect processes, the problems appear. So if I have 2 weeks to get your report that you need, then, and I know that any time in the 2 weeks I can work on this report, then I can put it off and cram at the end of the 2 weeks. I can work on it early, and I can make adjustments to it now and then. Or it might be a better situation for me is if you ask for 5 reports in a month. And I know full well that when I give you 5 reports, you don't have time to read them. So when we can build in advance in batches, we have built-in opportunities to hide problems. By the time my boss discovers that problem, one of the reports will be months away. And then we'll worry about the problem then. Now, what happens if I have an assignment it's now noon, by tomorrow morning I need this report, and we're going to take immediate action? Now there's some pressure. I know that if I don't do a good job, there's going to be immediate recognition. And that's what happens in a factory when you reduce inventory. That's what happened when Gary was in the body shop and there was no inventory. The process shuts down. Gary thought it was a mistake in the design of the body shop. But in fact, it was the design of the body shop to expose problems. And then you need to get clever, and you need to develop skill in solving the problems. And if you only put a Band-Aid on, if you don't do a root cause analysis, at some point, the problems will keep on coming back. And the problems will accumulate. There will always be new problems. And then you end up with chaos, and you end up with firefighting, and you end up with out-of-control processes. So in tightly linked processes, whatever they are, whether it's a knowledge work process or software programming or manufacturing, whatever the problems are, when you have tightly linked processes and the product of one step immediately becomes the input to another step, and there's some way of judging the quality of that product, then problems will be discovered very quickly. Then you could do something very special, which is you can solve problems one by one, and I call it one-piece flow problem solving. Now, when we look at masses of data and get our Six Sigma black belts to analyze it 100 ways, you are now doing batch problem solving. And you'll find a few of the biggest common problems and solve them and forget the rest. And you don't know enough in detail about any of the problems to really find the root cause. So the topic is developing Toyota leadership, and the way that in Japan you learned to be a carpenter was through the master-apprentice relationship. And in that relationship, the master was the master, and the apprentice was the student who's humble, who's groveling, who wants to learn from the master, and the master can basically ask him to do anything, and the student is expected to do it. If the first lesson in being a blacksmith is to clean the floor with a toothbrush, you clean the floor with a toothbrush. And you assume the master has some reason for wanting you to do that. There's some lesson that will come out of that. So that very much influenced the Toyota culture. That's how Sakichi Toyoda was taught, and that today is still the method. They now call it on-the-job development, but that's the method of teaching skills within Toyota, is the master-apprentice relationship. It doesn't happen every place, and one of the warnings I try to give in my books, I give very explicitly now, is caveat: Toyota is made up of people, and people are not perfect. And when you have hundreds of thousands of people, there's a lot more variation. So there's all sorts of things that happen within Toyota, but the model based on the principles is that you learn by doing with someone who is more expert than you, who's watching you, and they're critiquing you, and they're giving you feedback, and they're asking you challenging questions. And that's what they would call in Toyota leadership. The other driver is striving for perfection, and Gary Convis told me a story about going to Japan later in his career when he became managing officer, and Akio Toyoda greeted him when he arrived and immediately took him to the place where Sakichi Toyoda had been born, and then they went to a Japanese tea ceremony. The Japanese tea ceremony is something you do as a tourist. I went on a boat ride here yesterday. In Japan, one of the things you want to do on your list is participate in a tea ceremony. Why do you want to do it? Because it's going to take an hour to get poured a cup of tea. Why not go to Starbucks? And the reason is that in that time period, a lot of special things happen. And if you observe, which I was through a tea ceremony. I had no idea by the time it was done, I had no idea why I'd done that and why it was such a big deal. But if you observe better than I did, what you notice is almost a show. Actually, it is a show. It's a tightly scripted, exceptionally well acted performance. And the server is continually improving the service provided to the customers and has gotten better and better and better so that you would, for example, not notice she's coming and going as you're talking. And you would notice that every single movement and and eye contact and lack of eye contact, everything is done has a purpose. So at the end of this tea ceremony, and Gary thought it was kind of neat to see a Japanese cultural ceremony, then Akio Toyoda asked Gary, "So what did you see?" Which again kind of throws Gary. Well, it was a nice cup of tea. And Gary starts to explain what he saw, and then starts to realize how incredible this woman was, the incredible level of skill and the incredible performance. And finally he's describing that, and then Akio Toyoda says, "Gary, you've just discovered the meaning of standardized work, which is striving for perfection. As the individual who is trying to perfect themselves through the work that they do." So, how do you get leaders to be like these leaders that were for Gary were Japanese? Gary then had to try to become one of these leaders, which was a struggle. He'd been with Ford for 20 years. And what you want the leaders to do is live the values and live the philosophy to the point where it's a part of them, where they don't have to think about it. Most of the things that this server did in the tea ceremony have become so routine that she can focus on the one or two little things that she might improve next time. So we start with commitment to self-development. When Gary was hired to run NUMMI, there were a lot of things they liked about Gary. And one of the things that he emphasized was that in Ford, he was acting like a Toyota leader. He was running quality, and he would actually stop production. And nobody stopped production in Ford. He would go to the workplace, and he would talk to the workers, and he'd identify the problem and the root cause of the problem. So he was acting like a Toyota leader, in his mind, and in a lot of ways he was. And they said that impressed him, that he had this leadership potential. But what sealed the deal, and they did an exhaustive search before they settled on Gary, what sealed the deal was that Gary repeatedly was asking questions and listening and wanted to learn. And anybody that's taught knows that you can't teach somebody who doesn't want to learn. You can get them to write notes. You can get them to feed that back on a test. But you can't teach somebody except at a very superficial level unless they want to learn. And you're always looking for that one student who's just passionate about learning, whatever it is, a musical instrument, a sport. You're an engineer and you're trying to train the next generation of engineers. And you find that spark of someone who really wants to learn and is passionate about it, and they're interested in improving themselves. So that's the first step, is that you need to find people who are willing to commit to self-development. And what you want them to learn is the true north values of the company, but the only way they can learn it is by taking little steps. At first, they have to learn some very, very basic routine patterns of behavior, and then as they develop, what they're learning is more precise and more elaborate. So that's what the Japanese were doing over here. They were trying to teach, particularly Gary, because he was in the most critical position, and then everybody down to the team leader, how to develop themselves, how to learn, and how to think in the Toyoda way. And then when you teach somebody, then as they learn, they have an obligation in the Toyota system to teach others. And in fact, you'll see that Toyota is teaching the world. They're very open, and people wonder why, because that's one of the ways they contribute to society. That's their mission, is to teach, to learn and teach, learn and teach. And one of the things that you notice is that if you teach, you learn probably more than the student. Suddenly, they ask a question and you're caught by surprise. And you realize you might have thought about that 20 years ago, but suddenly it brings it back and makes you think about why we do this. Or maybe you never thought about it before. But what you need to do to coach and develop others is you need to be able to understand that person as an individual. What are their passions? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are they doing now? What would be a good vision for them as the next step in their progression? And what are some concrete steps you can take right now so that they could start to make progress toward that vision? And we use the term self-development learning cycles, that each time you learn something, you put something in practice, you get feedback, and then you modify your behavior or thinking, you've gone through a PDCA learning cycle. And it's through repeated learning cycles that you get better and better and better as a person, you have more to contribute to the company and the world, and you actually learn how to learn, so it becomes easier on the next PDCA loop. Once you're at a level where your leadership has a good understanding of their roles, of what it is to learn, of how to solve problems, of how to develop people, then you need to get down to the core value-added operations. And your first goal is to create a reliable, stable, self-sustaining process on the shop floor of running the process at a high level and improving the process at a high level. And that takes skill, and it takes another kind of leadership. It takes the leadership of the supervisor, the team leader, the hands-on person who's on the floor, and how they react minute by minute to the problems that they face. And now you're building local capability so that you as a leader who may have 500 people reporting to you don't have to do the thinking for 500 people. The thinking's being done by 500 people, but in a routine way. There's a natural rhythm daily to the problem solving, to the Kaizen. And now you've got an organization in which the top, the middle, and the bottom share values, share a philosophy, and share some level of capability. Then you could do the real magic, which is align the goals and align the improvement activities so they add up to a really big impact on the company. And that's called Hoshin Kanri. And what you have to do for Hoshin Kanri is start with, again, a true north vision. What is it we're trying to achieve in the ideal? And how do we know if we're on track or off track? And then what shorter term goals do we have, and how do my goals align with my boss? And how am I going to approach solving this goal? Right now, one of the goals in Japan, they have a problem that the yen is too strong, and also they get taxed a lot in Japan. There's a lot of problems with being in Japan. So there's an easy countermeasure, which is pull out, move production overseas, and they've been criticized for not doing that and not being a good corporate citizen, caring about their shareholders enough. But they also have a feeling of moral obligation, and part of that obligation is to the Japanese government and the Japanese people, and they've made a commitment to keep a certain number of jobs in Japan. It's an informal commitment. It's not written down. It's not legally binding, but they feel a sense of honor to keep those jobs in Japan. So if you're going to keep the jobs in Japan, and you've got a problem that it's a terrible place to do business, then you have to solve the problem in a different way than moving production out. And the way they solved it is by the Hoshin Kanri process, which was, in manufacturing, for example, reduce cost by 30%. And then we can be competitive. Not a trivial thing when you are already one of the most efficient companies in the world, and there's not any low-hanging fruit. Now, the senior managers, the general managers, the vice presidents, when they got that request, what you can say is also an order, they say, hi, we will make it happen. Have no idea how they're going to do it. But they're doing it. They're already into the second year, and they're working, it's over 3 years, so it's 10% a year, and they're right on target. And what's the magic? The magic is 1 through 3. That they've invested over decades in developing leaders who've gone through repetitive PDCA loops and have learned how to solve problems, they've learned how to lead, they've learned how to engage people, and they've learned that when we solve lots of little problems and some big problems in a systematic way, and we have a clear goal in mind, we always achieve the goal. We don't know how we're going to achieve it at the beginning, and we don't care. We don't need to have a roadmap. We're willing to take a step into the land of uncertainty and start trying things. So the mentor, in the meantime, there's always somebody there who's checking on you, and they're trying to teach you the core values, which starts with a spirit of challenge, and that's what happens when I say, hi, I'll do it. I'm taking on the challenge. Toyoda took on the challenge. And they're going to do it through continuous improvement. And they're going to do it by doing it at the Gemba, by going and seeing, and not by sitting in the office and looking at their spreadsheet to see if the numbers are on track. And they're going to do it through teamwork, and they're going to do it in a way that's respectful of people. So they have to live those values. If they don't live the values and they get the results, they've still failed. And all of these steps take PDCA loops, these learning cycles I mentioned, over and over and over again. So you're continually always developing yourself, you're always teaching others and improving the way you teach others. All these steps are all works in progress. It's not like a linear thing where you're at 4 and then you're done. Now the problem is that these days Hoshin Kanri's become popular, and senior executives love it. If you go to any senior executive and you say, I've got a way in which any order you give with any target you set will be carried out and your target will be achieved, I guarantee you will not get kicked out of anybody's office, unless I don't believe you. But nobody's going to say, that's a dumb idea, why would I want that? So they want that, and it's a very attractive, actually seductive, but they haven't gone through 1 through 3. So with an incapable organization, they want to shove goals and objectives down into that organization, and somehow good results and using a good process are going to happen. At the heart of this in Toyota is the work group, and the work group is the same really throughout the company. It's very defined in manufacturing. There's a group leader who's the first line supervisor. There are team leaders who are working level people, and they have time offline to do team leader work. And there's always, for a team like this of 20-something people with 4 team leaders, the ideal is that 2 people are offline responding to Andon and working on Kaizen and collecting data and doing quality checks and watching people and correcting them and training them as they do their work to the standardized work. And there's 2 people who are working online, and they're rotating between working online and being offline as a leader. But there's never should be a situation where they're all working online. And if they're all offline, you've got probably waste that might be necessary in the very early stages of launching a plant. So they're not working team leaders in that there's always enough resources offline to actually respond to the Andon calls that are happening frequently, and also to work on continuous improvement and help the group leader. In some cases, the group leader becomes a team leader, and that's when they're in a crisis mode. That's when you know they have trouble. This is the visual meeting area for the group leaders. Now, this is not, this looks elaborate enough that it could be for a whole plant, but it's just for one group leader. and as many group leaders as you have, say it's 1 to 25, and in Georgetown, Kentucky, they have 6,000 people, so that's a lot of boards. And they still print out the paper, even though it comes off of a computer, and they post it, and they have a simple visual that may be hard to see, but you might see red X's. And that's where your eye should be drawn, is to the red X's, because that's where the problems are. And a problem means we're not on track. This is what we should be doing this week. This is what we should have accomplished in quality improvement and safety improvement and cost reduction, and we didn't do it. So we have a problem. And that's where they need coaching support. And the top levels come down and see that, and they discuss it, and they walk to the line, and they try to help them, mostly by asking them challenging questions. And these boards are aligned. So the trim group 1, which is part of assembly, they have their top level objectives, which are the Hoshin objectives of their boss, and then they break those down to key performance indicators, to metrics that mean something for their process, and they'll break it down to what they're working on right now. We're working on reducing defects right now in this one process for this week. And when we achieve our goal, we'll get a little closer to the quality defect KPI and target that the boss has for our group. And then that rolls all the way up to the plant level, where they have a meeting room with all the metrics for all the shops in the plant. So you have a line of sight from the top to the bottom. And the line of sight's in the computer, but the usefulness of it is really to go and see the actual situation and go where the boards are, and then when there's red, go where the problem is and see it firsthand. This was one of the things Gary set up, one of the first things he set up when he left Toyota and became the CEO of Dana, which is a whole other story, a turnaround story, where they actually built really good leaders while they were shutting down plants in order to survive. They were emerging from bankruptcy, and then the recession hit, and gas prices went up, and they had to downsize and restructure to survive. And Gary's job was building operational excellence. He was the CEO, and the chairman was tearing down, and Gary was building up at the same time. And the way he built up is through starting with the key performance indicators and a frequency of reporting, and brought in knowledgeable people who could coach. So that if you're a plant manager, every week you talked on the phone to a coach and told them what you did this week, what worked, what didn't work, what are the red items. The person at the other end was asking you questions, and then you would work on some things and report back the next week. And if you were in a shop, you had an hour-by-hour board. Very simple. Many people have it. All you need is a flip chart and a marker. Every hour, when am I supposed to produce? How many good parts? How many did I produce? Why is there a difference? And it leads to daily problem solving. You start to see the process, if it's serious and you have good leaders, you'll start to see the process stabilize and then start to improve. So there's a lot of talk these days about standardized work for managers. I know you've gotten exposed to that at this conference. And really what you're trying to do as a leader is you're trying to help people. You can pull people up. Some would show the leader behind, watching. But in any case, the leader's job is to raise the level of other people. And to do this, they need a certain portion of their job to be repetitive activities that are checking and giving feedback and coaching. Otherwise, they won't do it because there's so many distractions. The higher up you go, the more distractions there are from outside the company, from many parts of the company. For a team leader, the repetitive part of their job can be most of their job. For a senior executive, or for a manager, the repetitive part is a small part of their job, but there's still some portion of the job that can be repetitive. The good thing about something repetitive is it becomes a habit. And you don't have to think every day, how am I going to do my Gemba walk? How am I going to check the process? Because you've got a routine. And this is an example of repetitive activities designed to identify abnormal situations. And it's done at the Gemba. And one of the reasons you have all these boards that are so clear, here's the red, here are the problems, here's the target, here's the actual, is not just for the people in the work area. It might be helpful to them, but they might already know. But it's really helpful for management to come and coach, because they don't have time to ask enough questions to really understand all the problems in the area. But they can see a red X. So this would be an example of a daily round that the plant manager is walking through the plant, and you'll see the president of the Toyota plants, the presidents will make a daily walk. And it's just part of their routine. They'll do it every day unless there's some emergency. And this is the area they've decided I'm going to do a deep dive for this work group. I'm going to spend more time, and they'll change that every day. And then every place they go, there's things that they're looking for. They have something that they've been focusing on. And for example, in HR, it might be the hiring plan. And they're going to be asking questions about that. And if it's visual and if they can see the status, then it's much easier for them to ask the right questions and challenge the thinking of people. Okay. So this is a necessary step, but it's only a step until leaders naturally become lean leaders, until they've developed to the point where they just do this and they don't need it written down and they don't need it to become formal, written, standardized work. In the book, we make a little bit disparaging analogy and say it's like training wheels on a bicycle. It will help you to learn, but at some point, somebody's got to give you a push without the training wheels where you're actually riding the bike. So what the leaders are doing is asking questions, listening, and helping, actually supporting people at the Gemba. And they have to learn it, and like anything that you learn that's complex, it doesn't happen in a 1 week or 2 week or 2 day classroom training course. None of these leaders, none of these leader teachers would even consider the possibility of certifying their students in a 1 week or 2 week course. It's going to take years. It's going to take PDCA over and over again. And they know that. They don't know what PDCA is. They didn't hear about Deming, but they know how to teach the skills that they've mastered. So in summary, what lean leaders need is to manage from the Gemba, and they need to develop themselves and others to live the core values of the philosophy, to manage effectively from the Gemba so that they actually know what they're doing when they're making these standard walks, to become a role model for disciplined problem solving, and to become a teacher and a coach for disciplined problem solving. So they have to be able to do it, and then they have to be able to teach others to do it. And the final note is from a former executive VP who says the most important factors are patience, focus on the long term rather than the short term, reinvestment in people, product, and plant, and an unforgiving commitment to quality. Thank you.
You know, George, I remember the first time I listened to the recording from Winnipeg, I thought I understood lean. What I thought, though, was about waste reduction, efficiency, tools, things like that. But what I heard from Dr. Liker is the story of Sakichi Toyoda, and something shifted. What struck me most about this was Sakichi didn't sit down and design the perfect loom. He solved one problem at a time. And over time, those solved problems moved him closer to his vision. And the second thing that hit me was Jidoka. The idea that the loom would stop automatically when a thread broke. Build quality into the process. Don't let defects flow downstream. And to think that that was in the 1920s, and it still defines Toyota today. It made me realize that lean isn't about speed, it's about integrity in the process.
Yeah, that's really good. I think about that in
Integrity in the process is so important. I remember going to Toyota and listening to one of the presenters, and he said, "Look, here's the banner," and it was the famous banner. It said, "Good people, good products," something along those lines. In other words, we build people here at Toyota who build great products. But you've got it right. Jidoka is in the middle of all of that, which is stop and let's fix problems. And that is related to both the leadership, management side as well as a process side. Don't pass on defects. Now, I did learn that early. I didn't call it Jidoka, but early in my career in 1994, when I worked for a bus manufacturer, we had two rules in the plant. Number one, never pass on any known defects. That was the number one rule. We just went from old batch manufacturing to all of a sudden this. Never pass on any known defects. And then the second rule was if you get it passed to you, work your way upstream and work with the supplier, whoever it is internally, and let them know what the defect is because you don't want to pass that on and you've accepted a defect. So you got to now say, do I want to accept defects? And the answer should be no. So yeah, I learned that early on, but it's amazing. It was amazing for me that my definition of lean changed. I mean, my definition was do things the least wasteful way. That's what it was. And then when I heard Jeff talk, I thought, you know what? It is solve one problem at a time and work your way towards your vision. So create a vision, and lean is about problem solving your way towards your vision. So that was a big mind shift for me. Anything else, Tom, struck you about that?
Like I said, it fascinates me how Toyota, they didn't have money. It wasn't like they had a lot of money when they started all this. They didn't have capital. They didn't have any kind of advantage. Ford was 9 times more productive. And yet Teiichi Ono and his team kept solving problems, under constraints. And so when we talk about the building quality in and stuff, obviously, you look at Sakichi Toyoda and what he built, but you also look at what Deming put into the Japanese mindset on building quality in. And it just really strikes me how, Deming passed away 33 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, honestly, I would say over half of the manufacturers, at least in the U.S., don't follow any of his teachings. And here's the thing: is that his teachings and Toyota teachings, they're just smart business. You don't have to call it lean. You don't have to call it anything. I mean, think about when we'd ask Shingo about what lean was. I remember asking him that, and he goes, "I don't know. I don't know what lean is. I know what the Toyota production system is."
Yeah.
Right? So but to this day, Jeff wrote his book over 20 years ago. And these guys may read the books, but I don't think they understand the books.
Yeah, what a big difference. It was funny because when we were on a bus, somebody asked Ritsu Shingo, you're right. He said I don't know what lean is, but I know what the Toyota production system is. And he asked, like, if I don't know anything about lean or the Toyota production system, and we're sitting on a bench together in a park, and I ask you, what is the Toyota production system? How do you define it? And he said, wow, Me? You want me to define it? And the guy said, yes, I want you to define it. How do you define the Toyota production system? And he said, the Toyota production system is an accumulation of small changes from everybody, and it changes the way things are done, like it changes the system. It's like an amoeba. And I was surprised he knew the word amoeba, because an amoeba will, adjust and change and, redefine itself. It's a living organism. And that's what Toyota production system is. It's a living organism. And I remember Jeff telling me about Ono. He didn't want to share this. He didn't want to share it for fear that it would kill it, because people making improvements towards their goal is exciting. It's an exciting thing, but how do you put it on paper? Right? So that was one of the things. These values that came out of Sakichi Toyoda are still with the company today, which is like amazing. Amazing. When you go there and you hear the history in their museum, they list the values of the organization. They list the 2 pillars and the 5 core values today, right? So that's pretty good. I really enjoyed this, and I knew none of this. Going from a lean background, understanding lean from LEI, right? And how to implement. I knew how to implement because of Boeing, and I taught at Boeing. But I didn't know anything about the Toyota production system, so I had to go see for myself. That was the key.
Likewise. I agree, George. I thought it was tools, right? And then I realized it's not tools. I mean, Jeff, I think, said it's in the DNA of the company. I think that's what Jeff said. And it really is. It's in the DNA of the company. But what's the DNA of the company? It's the leadership, right? And these small improvements, listening to your people and these small improvements, that's what gets you to where they are. You strive for perfection. They know they'll never meet it, but they strive for it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so good. So, like, contributing to society, key value, customer first, key value. One of the things that really shocked me about this was just in time. The term came up in 1939 in a seminal speech by Kichiro Toyoda. Like 1939, are you kidding? That shocked me. So everybody knows just in time, but they don't really know Jidoka. And Jidoka defined today is something that, is a little different than I learned. I learned it as stop and fix problems, like quality at the source. That's Jidoka for me. Today it's called automation with a human touch. So I don't, it depends on the business you're in. They had to change it for themselves to make it clear. But those 2 pillars will live in a lot of companies because of the Toyota production system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny when you say automation with a human touch. Remember, Ritsuo-san didn't like that.
No, he didn't.
Because he said the only thing that machines should do is what's unsafe for people to do,
Yeah.
and jobs people didn't want to do.
Yeah. I love that. He's such a human, activist
Yeah,
kind of that way. So
yeah.
that's really good. So what do we got coming up? I mean, more and more of Dr. Jeff Liker's materials. This is lesson 2. We got 73 more. We're going to be at this for 3 years. Hopefully people are joining us and making comments, and especially the experts who know lean, who know
Yeah.
the Toyota production system. We're going to invite some of them on board, because I know quite a few of them when I was on the speakers circuit, but hey, they got to reach out too. So
Yeah, it'd be nice having some of them on.
right on. So with that, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
We hope this episode gave you something practical to apply this week.
Yeah, thank you for joining us for this episode of Leadership Excellence Podcast. And remember, if you want the 75 leadership lesson set, all you have to do is go to ow64.com and download our app. Join myself and Dr. Tom Lawless next time for more essential discussion on this topic.
We hope this episode gave you something practical to apply this week.
Yeah, thank you for joining us for this episode of Leadership Excellence Podcast. And remember, if you want the 75 leadership lesson set, all you have to do is go to ow64.com and download our app. Join myself and Dr. Tom Lawless next time for more essential discussion on this topic.